Hello, my name is Laurel Dosman, and I will be doing a presentation on what teaching practices help support self regulated learning in the music classroom. We will be looking at the work of Gary McPherson, who is an Australian professor out of the University of Melbourne, and Peter Mitzla, who is a American professor out of the University of Indiana. The inquiry question that we are looking to answer today are what teaching pedagogical practices help support self-regulated learning in the instrumental classroom? This is a list of the literature that we will be using today. McPherson and colleagues found that self-regulated learning for instrumental musicians in particular is important because instrumental musicians practice their parts independently typically and come together with their learning to rehearse with their group. This is a practice that happens even in the beginning of instrumental instruction. And because of this structure, it is important that students are able to self monitor and guide their own learning journeys. Students who begin their learning journeys with higher skills in these areas typically achieve higher performance levels. And due to this structure, students alone know what they individually need to work on and have the autonomy to know what to practice at home for their next rehearsal. This is a much more independent and self regulated learning experience compared to dance, sports, or drama learning structures. Traditional instrumental music teaching pedagogy is very much a master student type of paradigm. Master teachers often teach younger students and impart their knowledge. It's generally less collaborative and more teacher oriented and often leaves little room for discussion of progress. There are some side effects to this structure of education for instrumental learners, and that is that it can compromise student motivation and engagement. It can stifle practice quality, and it is a teaching pedagogy that has been the same for many centuries. And in our new age of learning, I think it's very important for us to move forward and change along with the educational philosophies of our current day and age. Self regulated learning practices can help update this type of teaching pedagogy. It can improve student motivation. It can improve student autonomy, where students can direct their independent goal setting and engage in their learning process meaningfully. And it can also improve engagement, which students are more actively engaged in their learning because they feel a part of the learning process. Now, McPherson did some work with Zimmerman, and they came up with the dimensions of musical self-regulation, which has 6 categories of motive, method, time, behavior, physical environment, and socialization. And they studied how beginner instrumental musicians moved from a socialization process where the teacher or the parent is helping facilitate the learning environment and what the students needed in order to move over to our self-regulated learning processes where the students are engaging with their own learning. Many of these studies found that there were 4 areas that positively impacted student motivation in self-regulated learning in instrumental music classrooms. One of them was school culture. Schools that supported vibrant music programming typically had better outcomes for student learning. Home support had a huge impact, and choice actually was a huge motivator in these studies for student engagement and ability to apply learning strategies when practicing as well. But the biggest factor was student self-efficacy. If students didn't believe that the goals that they had set were attainable, or that they had the skill or ability level to do them, motivation obviously ends and their learning process in instrumental education ends as well. McPherson and his colleagues found some interesting information out in a study of beginner students. They found that the families who provided gentle reminders, engaging students to practice, actually built a sense of autonomy in the students, and the students had longer outcomes and engagement with the programming than students whose families used extrinsic motivators such as rewards or controlling or demanding restrictions on student practicing. They also found that after a year of music instruction, parents' engagement with their child's learning dramatically decreased, and the parents started giving up on the student before the student started giving up on themselves in their learning journeys, which I found very interesting. McPherson found that students who came in with higher SRL skills and coping strategies achieved at higher levels of success throughout their learning journey. And they also found that when students are practicing and they're practicing something that their teacher is making them practice, students were not implementing the learning strategies that they had learned. But when students were practicing a song that they were personally motivated to learn and that they had been given the choice to learn, they found that students practice longer, more strategically. They implemented better strategies to be able to learn the passages and engaged with their learning in a much more meaningful way. Mitska, who studied upper high school and university level students, did a study where they had two groups of students. One group was taught practice strategies, and one group was taught self regulation principles, specifically the strategic action cycle. And they found that the musicians who received the self regulation instruction or were actively taught to engage in strategic action had way greater gains in their performance than those who were just taught practice strategies. Now, what does all of this mean? So, across the literature, where the outcomes seem to show that we need to move our teaching pedagogy from one where it's a master student teaching pedagogy to one where it's more student centered and goal oriented, giving students choice and autonomy in their learning. How can music teachers do this? For primary elementary music teachers, the literature says that they need to explicitly teach practice strategies. And as they're moving into intermediate and high school realms of learning, teachers need to be implementing the strategic action cycles and individual goal setting to increase student motivation. Teachers can give students choice in their learning. They can work with families on positive engagement with their child's learning. They can build autonomous learners through goal setting and active engagement in strategic action cycles. And they can build self-efficacy through supporting students through the learning process and presuming competence. I made a little strategic action worksheet for some of my intermediate band students, and I thought I would share this with you, where each term the students make a goal and we work through this sheet throughout the term. We use this as a self-assessment for their report cards each term. Now, where can this research go in the future? There were some huge gaps in the literature. One gap is on the impact of implementing self-regulated learning strategies at a beginning or primary level. So getting into those strategic action cycles early, right away, I think would be really beneficial, and studies to support that would be interesting to see. There is also gaps in the literature in group instrumental settings versus private individual instruction. There seems to be a lot on private individual instruction, but working in band or string group environments, there seems to be less data and less literature. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Here is a list of my references, and I hope you learned something today about self-regulated learning in the music classroom.